Thank you all for being here. I hope the first few hours of the New West Summit have started off very well for you. And we couldn't be more delighted to be back in what we think is one of the most important and certainly one of the most impactful conferences in cannabis. What New West Summit is able to do every year by bringing in together this nexus of innovation, technology, capital, entrepreneurs, and some of the most influential stakeholders in this space has been critical to the success of this conference. And so for those of you who may be new to this conference, I urge you to take advantage of the connections that you can build here, because this is truly a unique environment with some of the most forward-thinking minds in the cannabis industry. It is also one of my favorite conferences of the year, so I'm doubly glad to be here for that. My name is John Kagia, and I am the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data. And in the 30 minutes I have, I'd like to spend most of my time talking about the 5 drivers of transformative growth that we expect to see in legal cannabis that are going to lead this industry from being one that has been largely a North American phenomenon, transforming it into a truly global industry. I will try to reserve some time for questions at the end. And because of the amount of information I'll be getting through in the next 25 minutes, please, if possible, hold your questions until the end. We do have quite a lot of slides we're going to try and get through in the next few minutes. So what are the 5 key transformative issues that will take cannabis from being an American, a Canadian phenomenon, to being a truly global industry that rivals the most exciting emerging markets in the economy? One is the normalization of social attitudes. You see it everywhere. You see it when you walk down the street and somebody's smoking a joint and people don't react the way they used to. That used to be something that you used to marvel at, the audacity of it. And now you barely bat an eye. There's this idea of cultural affinity, how people who are socially connected, culturally connected, are actually transmitting both acceptance and use of cannabis. We'll talk about the role that North America is playing in establishing the global foundation. We're only a few days away from October 17th, where Canada will become the first developed nation to legalize adult use. And with it, I don't think one can overstate how important that milestone will be in shifting global attitudes. We'll talk about investment. And you literally cannot open a cannabis newsletter, a cannabis media publication today without reading about a major investment that's being made, a major acquisition that's being made. And we'll talk about some of the implications of this extraordinary influx of capital that we've seen, particularly in 2018. And then finally, we'll talk about the impact of falling prices. We are in California, arguably the world's most intensive cannabis production environment. And the impact on falling prices will be felt most consequential here. But the lessons from those falling prices will give us good guidance, good instruction on how to prepare the rest of the world from some of the disruption we expect to see in the next couple of years. So these normalizing attitudes that are driving acceptance and use. The most often cited number is the pace at which support for legalization is changing. So just since 2010, support for adult use legalization has increased 20 percentage points. That's a stunning change. Both Pew and Gallup, our country's foremost public polling firms, say that support for cannabis legalization is moving faster than even support for gay marriage. Now, if you remember how quickly that debate around gay marriage went from one where there was very, very strong opposition to certainly had become largely accepted and legal in virtually every state in the union, if this is moving faster than that, what does it mean for those of us who are at the vanguard, for those of us who are working to establish this industry today as more people come into the fold? Well, one of the implications is legalization support is not increasing in abstraction. We're actually also seeing an increase in use, and it's important to understand that the increase in use that we have seen since 2009, where we have 7.5 million more Americans report that they are frequent cannabis consumers. These aren't people who just woke up in the morning and decided cannabis is legal in Nevada or California or Maine today, so I'm going to try and smoke a joint for the first time in my life. What's actually happening is these are the people who tended to be the very occasional user. You might have a vape at a holiday party or a birthday party, but it was not something that they would proactively go out and get themselves. And one of the things that's changing as social attitudes have evolved, as people have become more accepting of cannabis, is that those occasional users are becoming more frequent users because cannabis is becoming more prevalent, is appearing more often in the settings where they are. So one example, think about the context of a dinner party. 10 years ago, lighting a joint at a dinner party would have been met with, in most cases, maybe not in California, but we're from DC where it's a slightly more buttoned up crowd. But in most places, lighting a joint at a dinner party in polite company would have certainly been met with a strong reaction. Contrast that with today, where you can pull out a vape and most people in the room might not even notice it because the odor is so light. In that context, if consuming a vape is non-disruptive, people who might be interested but wouldn't necessarily ordinarily consume it themselves are much more likely to say, yeah, let me try that. And we've seen this happen over and over. And these people who were occasional users ultimately become better oriented to the products. They realize that they don't have to learn how to roll a joint. You can buy pre-rolls. They don't have to buy a dab rig. You can get an elegant vape. You don't have to combust. You can use pills, topicals, or edibles. And the quality of these products has increased to the point where their consumption increases. They find ways to integrate it into their lives. And we're seeing this normalization appear in a spectrum of ways. And this is part of the catalyst for this accelerating acceptance. The first example, the wedding there is, for those of you from the area, Danny Walton, or Danny Green, now Danny Walton, who works with Harborside. She had a spectacular cannabis bar at her wedding. They had nearly $10,000 worth of product, cannabis product, as part of the wedding celebrations. There's a big feature about it in Forbes. This article got sent to me a lot. But the idea of a cannabis-infused wedding, which would have been a fairly radical notion a few years ago, is now perhaps not as radical as it once might have been. We talk about athletes where people would say you cannot be an athlete, you cannot be a respected performer if you consume cannabis. And then pictures on the internet emerged of Michael Phelps ripping a bong. And when the world's greatest Olympian is caught consuming cannabis, that forces people to rethink some of their attitudes, some of their assumptions. Take that a step further. We talk to athletes now who say that they'll use THC-infused products to help with their focus, to help them get in the zone and help keep them there. And then they'll use CBD products for things like recovery, for relaxation after a hard workout, to help them get them reset. The idea of weaving cannabis-derived products into your training is a relatively new notion, but one which is gaining momentum through products like CannAthletes. And then third, I'm sure you saw a few weeks ago, Sephora announced the sale of its first CBD-infused face mask. One of my cousins, who's a makeup fiend, I don't think I've ever seen her so excited about cannabis development. But think about that, a mainline makeup company offering CBD products, while it feels like an incremental change, relative to where we were 5 years ago, it's a radical development. Now just take those three scenarios, weddings, sports, and cosmetics. Weddings, $72 billion in 2016. Fitness, $83 billion. Cosmetics, $62 billion. If cannabis were to poach 1 or 2 percentage points of each of these sectors, that would be an industry in and of itself. That's the scale of opportunity we're facing. Cultural affinity is propelling acceptance and use. We've all seen this map of legal and illicit states. But one of the things to observe here is how the states are grouped together. You have the Pacific Coast states, which began all of this. Oregon, Washington, California. And then ultimately Nevada and Colorado. But cannabis has really been home on the West Coast in a way that it hasn't been in the rest of the country because of the attitudes toward cannabis and toward self-governance that we say people on the left coast hold. And look at the top right of the country, New England, where you have the granite state, live free or die mentality. We know some extraordinary cannabis producers who live out in the backwoods and say nobody ever comes out here to bother us so we can produce and focus our attention. And from New England, you've seen this kind of slow migration across the upper Midwest and a slow migration down the East Atlantic, which leaves just the center of the country as the one area where you don't have any legal regulated markets. And that's hardly surprising. They call it the Bible Belt for a reason. Cultural affinity keeps those communities largely, strongly against cannabis, even as the states around the edges of the country have slowly made this migration from illicit to medical to adult use. And that model of cultural affinity is interestingly being replicated on a global scale. So you have us here in North America, with our Canadian brothers and sisters leading the charge. But then you have the Latin Americans. Uruguay was the first, but Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Panama, Costa Rica, and quite a few others are now either in the process of or beginning to have very robust conversations about changing the legal status of cannabis in their markets. You have Western Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, England, where it's almost as if they all got up at about the same time and started propelling this conversation. It's no surprise, they're all quite culturally aligned. You have Oceania, Australia and New Zealand, who are serving as the anchors of that region. And most surprising to me, as a Kenyan by birth, is watching the developments in Africa. Literally within the span of about 3 months, you had Zimbabwe announce major changes to a medical cannabis legalization bill that they had passed but not really understood how they were going to regulate. But I think that surprised most of us. A few weeks later, the South African Supreme Court ruled that cannabis prohibition violates the human rights of South Africans and gave the government 2 years to develop a regulated framework. Think about that. Prohibiting cannabis is a violation of human rights from a relatively conservative African country. And then, much to my shock, literally 2 weeks after that, a parliamentarian in Kenya introduced a bill to legalize cannabis. And it wasn't laughed out of the parliament. Like there's a robust debate happening around it right now. If you'd have told me when I began my cannabis journey 4 years ago that Kenya would be in the mix of countries that were at the tip of the spear, I'd have been like, no way. Have you met my parents? Now it's my mother who's sending me articles from The Economist saying, is this what you're doing? Cultural affinity is propelling change at a pace that we can scarcely comprehend, but we must try and understand. Because cultural affinity gives us the best indicators of where cannabis legalization is likely to happen next, and where, for those of us who are thinking about this, not just as a regional or a state-specific or even country-specific market, but a truly global opportunity, cultural affinity gives us some direction as to where we should be looking next. And it helps that we have social media, digital media, to help build some of these cultural bonds. The top 10 cannabis-related cannabis channels on YouTube have collectively 500 million views and nearly 4 million subscribers. That's about 10% of the cannabis consumers in the US. Then you have these long-tail solutions. Now, the long tail we describe as slightly more issue or topic-specific subgroups. Companies like Massroots, which is like the Instagram of cannabis. Doobie, which has been doing quite well. Growers Network, a network for professional growers. Hi There, a dating app that nearly has 1 million participants. Who knew that cannabis and dating went so well together? Even Kagia, LinkedIn for the cannabis industry. These communities enable us to build deeper connections, fostering that ability to perpetuate our shared values, or cannabis enthusiasts' shared values. What role is North America playing? Well, the US alone is an industry that this year we forecast will do $10 billion, and that's just amongst legal states, medical and rec combined. And that is just sales to cannabis consumers. So that doesn't include the supply chain, that doesn't include the ancillary products and services, which dramatically escalate that. By 2020, we'll be at nearly $15 billion, and by 2025, we'll be at $23 billion. That doesn't include the addition of new potential markets like Michigan, which are going to be very, very significant if it passes its measure this November. States like New York and New Jersey, which are very, very actively pursuing their legalization measures. And it certainly doesn't account for the potential of a major federal development in the 2020 to 2023 timeframe. So this is the baseline. And that's a substantial opportunity. Combining the US and Canada and taking it out a bit further, just amongst the markets where it's currently legal, between 2018 and 2025, the combined US and Canada markets will represent $173 billion in retail sales. Those are the kind of numbers that get people who've been on the sidelines sitting up and paying attention. And if you've watched some of the frothing that's starting to happen in places like Wall Street, it's precisely these kinds of numbers that are getting their attention. And there's an interesting evolution that's happening as we think about what North America is building. Because North America is instructing us what the future product landscape will look like. When most markets first legalized, flower accounts for anywhere from 90 to 95% of total sales. And that other 5% is generally very simple edibles, the kind of brownies people used to get when they're used to make in their college dorms. Post-legalization, one of the things that begins to happen very, very quickly is this transition away from flower to non-flower products, and specifically to concentrates and vapes. I used the analog earlier about consuming cannabis at a dinner party. Part of the reason why products like vapes are so popular is their discretion, the convenience. It turns out, and our research doesn't show this, but we've learned from our study of this, most people are terrible joint rollers and don't enjoy it. Vapes help eliminate that. The opportunity around topicals, particularly with products like CBD, when we're dealing with an aging society, an aging population, dealing with aching joints and skin conditions, the topicals are hugely popular, particularly amongst people who don't want to combust. And then we have the edibles, which the innovation that is going into cannabis edibles today, the food science that's going into cannabis edibles today, is unlike any that we have seen to date. It's part of the reason why you look at, say, the flavor profiles of Dixie's beverages, and from comparing their Gen 1 products to, I guess would be probably Gen 6 or 7 now, you've gone from orange, cherry, might have even been red. The profiles were so basic. And you start having flavors like jasmine pomegranate, a cannabis-infused beverage that's delicious enough that you'd want to drink it even if it wasn't infused. That's how you get consumers to rethink their products. and rethink which products they prefer to consume. And there's three classes of products that I think are going to be really influential in shaping the future market. One is what we call outcome-specific effects. So the problem with strains is that most consumers, particularly most casual consumers, have no understanding the difference between green crack, OG Kush, Girl Scout cookies, and, pardon the expression, dog shit, which one dispensary owner very excitedly told me was his best-selling or best strain in-house. I can't imagine most people walking in and recommending that for their mother, but here we are. Knowing the strain name doesn't tell you what effect you're going to experience. And so the products that are now simplifying that by creating a consistent, standardized, replicable experience that lets you know that you consume this, you'll feel energy, you'll feel sleep, you'll feel focused. I was talking to someone recently who said they're working on a product that is called Sexy. Apparently it helps people feel sexy. Simplifies the purchase decision, and it starts giving us the Coke experience, where you know what you're going to get in every can. Second, there's a lot of chatter around this idea of cannabis-infused beer. Non-alcoholic, in some cases low-dose THC, in some cases high-dose THC. But in all cases, looking for that fast-acting, not the 45-minute wait after you've consumed an edible for it to kick in, but 10, 15 minutes, so you're almost approximating the onset of beer, of alcoholic beer. Really important for us to understand where this trend is going, partly because of the amount of capital being invested in R&D here. Constellation Brands, $4 billion investment in canopy growth. Corona, Lagunitas, and Two Roots are all investing in this. But also because this approach to product development gives people an analog to alcohol that they can understand. A glass of wine, a shot of spirits, a bottle of beer, a can of Two Roots. Those analogs that enable people to understand, well, if I have 5 shots of spirits, I might get lively. So if I have 5 cans of beer, I will get lively too. Building those comparators make it easier for consumers to make better informed decisions about which products they consume. And this is one trend that we should be monitoring closely. And the third product is the undiscovered one, the killer app that we don't yet know or fully understand. There's huge opportunity for innovation in this space. Innovation in the way we consume cannabis and the way we manufacture it. And we've barely scratched the surface. So for those of you basement tinkerers who are trying to figure out a way to have an impact on this space, don't rule out the opportunities that remain to create the next great cannabis delivery mechanism. Because it's safe to say the nexus of investment, technology, science, biological science, understanding of the plant, create huge opportunities for us to create more elegant ways to deliver cannabis. We've talked about investment, so I'll quickly get through this. 2018 was already on track to blow 2017 out of the water in terms of the amount of investment that had been made into cannabis. In 2017, about $3.5 billion was invested into the entire industry. By the first half of 2018, we were already at nearly $4 billion. And that was before Constellation Brands wrote a single check for $4 billion to Canopy Growth, the single largest investment made into a cannabis company to date, and in that one move, doubling the amount of investment that had been made in cannabis this year. Where's all this money going? Or what is the effect of all of this money? Part of it has been that it has driven the valuations of Canadian licensed producers to stratospheric, almost nose-bleeding valuations. Tilray was briefly trading at nearly a $25 billion market cap about a month ago. It's down to about 10, but that's still nothing to sneeze at, given that's how much money we expect to be in sales in the US this year alone. Collectively, the top 10 Canadian LPs, and these numbers will have varied slightly because of the market volatility, but are trading nearly $25, $30 billion valuations. Again, we're starting to talk about real money now. And this is why the big investors, the big institutions are starting to pay attention to this space. But the two aspects of this industry Given how much of the capital has gone into building dispensaries, building cultivation facilities, there are two aspects that still need investment and present very significant opportunity. One is business operation solutions. There's still too many different languages being spoken amongst the technologies in cannabis, which means that if you are a multi-state operator and you're being forced to use one seed-to-sale system in one state and a different one in a different state, and depending on how your data is being inputted, Blue Dream or OG Kush in one market could be tagged as O.G.Kush. It could be tagged as O no space, G no space, Kush in a second market. And your challenge then becomes, how do you reconcile that? How do you know that your two products are the same products across these markets? In every other consumer environment, we have standard nomenclature for the way we tag products. We don't have that yet in cannabis, and that's going to be critical to advancing the innovation and transparency and efficiency of this industry. And there's a few companies that are working on this, including MJ Freeway, Tilt, Greenbits, Headset, BDS. They're all trying to work on this standardization solution. But we all need to, this is an aspect where the industry does need to start singing together. And then second is on the genetics. We need to move away from strain names as the way we define our products and start thinking about total chemical profile and genetics, so that it is clear that a Blue Dream from one farm is genetically similar or identical to a Blue Dream from another farm. It takes the guesswork out of it and makes sure that we know which products consumers are buying. The final point I'll make is about falling prices, and I think this is going to be particularly important here in California, but true everywhere. An example from Colorado, which does a really good job of tracking the average market rate for wholesale cannabis. Since 2018, the average market rate for a pound of cannabis in Colorado has fallen from over $2,000 to just over $800. It's down 58%. If you had built your business in 2012 with the expectation that you would be getting, or that your break-even point was $1,300 a pound because you were making $3,000 a pound and the margins were great, at $800 a pound, you're now in deep, deep trouble. The takeaway here is plan for where the industry is going, not where it currently is. This sort of disruption, this extraordinary downward price pressure we're facing, is going to be true across the entire value chain. We're seeing it first in cultivation, but it's expected to impact everywhere else. Start planning for that now. Get your operations as lean and efficient as possible now, because doing it once the market reaches this inflection point is too late. By that point, the most efficient operators will have a strategic advantage that will be impossible to overcome. We're seeing a lot of consolidation, this acceleration or race to scale. In in California, the top 10 license holders of cultivation licenses already have nearly a quarter of the licenses on the market. Now, yes, these are all individual small grow licenses that they own, but in 4 years when they open up to unlimited licenses, you can see the efficiencies, the economies of scale that happen when you have all of these licenses grouped together. Another reason why efficiency is going to be so important, because even if they're not able to do it now, the large-scale operators are preparing for it now. Everyone else must be too. And then there's a cost dynamic. As we begin, we're at the very beginning of a global industry, still have a long way to go. But start thinking about this conversation I had with some producers in Canada. And we were having this conversation that, a really efficient operator in Canada may be able to get to 70, 80 cents a pound. 70, 80 cents a gram. A few days later, I had a conversation with a Thai producer who said he can get it down to 2 cents a gram. If that is our future, and it is a long way off still, but if that is our future, how do you ensure that you can remain competitive, viable in that environment, even as you build your business today? Now, I'm not saying head for the hills quite yet. It's going to be a while before the Thai get their market up and running and before they start exporting. We have runway. But you have to start thinking about this now, because it is coming. So what are some of the takeaways from this? The advent of cannabis-appropriate situations, the places where we're comfortable consuming cannabis, is accelerating acceptance, and this is a catalytic event that's happening both domestically and internationally. Cultural affinity gives us a great indicator of where cannabis is most likely to be legal next, based on where it's currently legal. Like attracts like. Social networks are helping build those community bonds, and there's actually still huge opportunity for cannabis-specific or cannabis-inflected social networks. Because when you have a market of 30 million cannabis consumers in the US, that's a lot of people with a lot of diverse interests that can find a nexus point of cannabis and their particular interests. We need both business and scientific standards as a matter of urgency. We are a $10 billion going on $30 billion industry that's still operating without a backbone. We need that core infrastructure, and we applaud all the companies that are working to help establish that. Prepare for the falling wholesale prices. You will feel it first here in California. It will be most acute here in California, particularly amongst the smaller and least efficient operators. But there's steps you can take today to prepare your business for this inevitable future by focusing on efficiency, on optimization, and on doing what you do best. In tomorrow's world, we can't be all things to all people. We can't do everything that we want to do. Pick the things you know, focus on them, and make sure you can compete, or you're best positioned to compete in this extraordinary future that we face. These are just some of the things that we, New Frontier, explore as part of our work that is singularly focused on the evolving market for legal cannabis. We have quite a number of very compelling reports that are going to be coming out in the next few weeks, including one on the hemp industry, one on cultivation innovations, some interesting work we're doing on the consumer side, and then product testing and product quality. Regardless of where you sit in the cannabis industry, we have extraordinary intelligence that we'd like to share with you. Because in nearly 4 years of doing this, in doing nothing but this, we feel that our team has amassed some of the most important and insightful both data and actionable insights on where this cannabis industry is today and critically where it's going. My name is John Kagia. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer with New Frontier Data. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference. I'm available for questions if you have any. Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned the increase in users, but I'm curious, and I always think about this, how much of that increase is attributable just to the changing shift of people accepting it, being more comfortable talking about their use?
Great question. So the question is, how much of that increase in users is people being more comfortable admitting that they consume versus people who are actually consuming more? We think it's a combination of both. And we're the first to admit that even the best regarded government data on cannabis use is underreported because quite a few cannabis consumers would not be comfortable answering a call from the government and admitting how much cannabis they consume. That has certainly changed. But based on the research we have been doing with consumers themselves, we are also seeing this kind of tendency or penchant for increased use because it's more available, more prevalent, and they're finding more nodes of connectivity with cannabis in their day-to-day life in ways that it didn't used to be. Okay. They're about to yank me off stage. I am going to be in the back if you'd like to connect with me for further questions. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.